welcome together with me the chief economist of the German Association of the Automotive Industry, Dr. Manuel Kallweit. He will give us a quick speech, an introduction to the market situation, and afterwards I have the pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to that, to dive into an individual talk with him and to really find out where we are in Germany, but also internationally when it comes to the automotive industry. So a major round of applause for Dr. Kallweit. The floor is yours.
Ja, schönen guten Tag. Ich freue mich, hier zu sein.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here. I have brought some slides for you, slides of how we see the automotive industry, the situation of the automotive industry in the association, not only for suppliers. It is difficult not only for Germany, but also for Europe. And it is, I think, generally a difficult time for the automotive industry globally. And this is due to several reasons. Looking at the geopolitical situation, for example, there are major difficulties. There's a lot of protectionism. There's a lot more tariffs that we have to deal with compared to a couple of years ago. There are very diversified value chains in the automotive industry, and this has major impacts, of course. For Europe, there's the transformation, and this has already gone quite far. We have a lot of electronic mobility coming in. The competition with China is high. Many new players are coming into the market. They're coming into Europe. Chinese suppliers are gaining more and more market shares. So various businesses in the automotive industry are facing major challenges. What I've brought for you here is a sort of a broader picture. On the left-hand side, you can see the production. That's the production of cars. How many cars are being manufactured in Germany from 1970 to today? From 1970 to the 2010 years, production has gone up to over 5, almost 6 billion cars that we've manufactured. Then things went down in 2019, then the pandemic came along, we had problems with semiconductors, and then we sort of reached a level in 2020 which was almost as high as in 1970, so that was a major break, and we're now back at 4 billion cars for Germany, and that is this year's value, that is last year's value, that is the value from 2 years ago. Not much is changing. That is the market level, that is the manufacturing level that we're dealing with in Germany. That's 1.5 billion cars less than we were dealing with 2 years ago. What are other European countries looking like? This is France. France is an automotive country, and it is today at less than 1 billion. This is Italy. The line at the bottom is the zero line. That's simply not simply a different scale. No, that's zero. And Italy is going towards zero. And then there's countries where things are a little bit better. This is Spain. Spain is at a level which is higher than what it used to be. And this is the UK. Not much is happening there. The Brexit was happening. Now, what is this telling us? This picture tells us that the situation in Germany is difficult. We are building less cars than we used to, but our level is stable at 4 billion, and other traditional automotive countries in Europe are under a lot more pressure, actually, and they might even hit zero soon. There are some countries where production has increased. That's, for example, the Czech Republic. Hungary is on a rise, but the levels are not super high, especially for Hungary. It is 20% below what it was in 2019. On the right-hand side, you can see this in more detail. The orange bars represent the change, whereas the current production level as opposed to the highest level they had. For Europe, it is 27% less production as opposed to the peak. Now, look at Italy. That's 78% below the highest level. So a lot has happened there. And this, of course, has effects on employment in Germany. 1.5 billion cars less that are being built. Look at the right side here. That is the employment rate between 2019 and 2024. Not much changed. 60,000 people less are employed, but there is more than 1 billion cars less being built. Now, if you calculate the productivity here, you will not have great results. Now, especially looking at 2020 and 2021 and 22, production here was low, but employment was high. So knowing these figures really raised the question what was happening in employment. But look at the current year, 2025, a lot has actually changed. There was a major drop, especially for the supplying industry. Every fourth job was lost in the supplying industry since 2018 in Germany. I just showed you that in Germany, production has sort of leveled out at the 4.5 billion level. Why is that? This is the production split by types of production. In the middle, we have the ICE cars, 2025 as opposed to 2016, 2017. You will get similar numbers as France or Italy. That's less, minus 60%. What has stabilized in Germany, you can see here on the right, that's the production of electric cars in Germany. For this year, we're at 1.6, 1.4, 1.5 billion. So that's a plus of 24%. Sorry. Is that a lot? Is that a little? Well, it's not enough to level out the losses of the ICE cars. On the right-hand side, you can see that Germany is the second biggest producer of electric cars in the world. China is in the first position, and then Germany, who builds 3 times more electric cars than Korea and a lot more than in Japan. You will not find any other country in the world with figures like this for electric cars. Why is that? Because the market for electronic vehicles in the world is not spread out. USA, China, and Europe, if you look at the global market for cars, generally those are the regions representing 2/3 of all the cars in the world. But it is 95% of all the electric vehicles are built in these 3 regions and sold in these 3 regions. And then here you can see how much of that is for China. And China is not only building the BEVs, the battery electric vehicles, but also the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. For the USA, over the past years, not much was happening. And the current administration is we don't know whether they will invest heavily into the electric vehicle industry. Europe is double the size compared to the USA when it comes to electric vehicles. And now, my final slide, I initially said that the situation in Germany is difficult, and then I said we're building a lot of electric cars for Germany. And here you can see the market shares of German manufacturers for electronic mobility. And here you can see the green bars, that's the market share of German manufacturers only for electronic vehicles. And the gray bars is the total market. Now, let's take a look at Europe. German manufacturers, in comparison for electronic vehicles, have a higher share in the entire market, also for combustion engines. And the German market share for electronic vehicles is as high as ever. And that in times in Europe where Chinese businesses and Chinese manufacturers are coming into the market heavily. These Chinese manufacturers are getting market shares, but also the European and German ones are getting market shares. So the cake is the shares, the distribution of these shares is changing heavily. And the question is, how will that look like in the future when the Chinese are coming in more and more, and if South Koreans and Italians will lose their shares?
Why is the case such for electric mobility? We have regulations in Europe which determine that 1 in 3 vehicles that's sold this year has to be electric. Many of them pure battery electric vehicles. If you don't have that, there are sanctions, penalties issued by the European Commission, but the demand in the individual European countries is not as high as it should be. In Croatia, there's a market share of 1%. In Norway, there's 95% market share for battery electric vehicles. And in between, there's Germany 26, Italy 24, France 24, sorry, Italy 9%. Denmark 50%. So the cars that you can buy there are the same ones, but the market shares differ. And this has to do with the fact that the requirements, charging infrastructure, electricity prices, available income differs so much in the individual European countries. So for Germany, it's important for electric mobility to be ramped up. Electric mobility costs a lot of money, costs added value, costs employees, and this will have implications. And in Europe, we need a regulation which makes it possible for this transformation to make sense in an economic sense. And this brings me to the end of my short introductory presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Kalweit. Now, I have to say, while talking to you, how can you become neutral? Either you have an ICE car or a battery electric vehicle, and I have an electric car, so I have a clear perspective on this. What I find fascinating is it wasn't as negative as I thought it would be. How would you describe the situation, the scenario? Because the development sounds quite good for Germany, doesn't it? So it depends on what perspective you're looking at. If you're an OEM bringing electric cars on the market, then you will find positive news. The question is, at the moment, is it a huge business case? In some cases it may be, but not in all, probably. If you look at the supplier perspective, then you will see that an electric car has markedly less added value than an ICE would have had. And if you still have to do with ICEs, then your share on the market has become much smaller. So we do realize that in the supplier industry, the mood is rather poor. The challenges are huge. Many have embarked on the path to electric mobility, but it's not as if this is something that would happen on its own, because the numbers, the unit numbers are still so low that the high investments that would have to be made wouldn't pay off. But the critical question should be allowed. Did we miss something? I mean, we're talking about suppliers, ZF, Siemens, and so on. So there's major companies here that are globally active, and the trend was something that was foreseeable. I understand that the transformation itself is a huge challenge. But how do you see this in comparison with other countries? Did we simply not react fast enough? Or do we have different framework conditions than other countries? Answer, well, I don't know whether we've missed. I don't really want to hear this. Did we miss the point in time where we should have reacted? You read this every time. It comes from the economists, from the political community. Whenever people mention electric mobility, they say, well, we missed something. Otherwise, it's not a suitable discussion. If I look at the fact we're the second biggest manufacturer of electric vehicles, if we missed something, then who hasn't missed something? You saw the figures in France, or what about United States? In Japan, electric vehicle share is 2%. So you can check all over the world. China has a higher electric vehicle share than Europe, but all other countries don't. So as the automotive industry, we, of course, need to look at the demand all over the world, and of course we have to service this need. And I have to tell you, the demand for electric mobility is not something that just goes automatically. Looking at the problems in the automotive industry, it's not the problem that the cars are not in demand and that we can't produce them. Of course, we can produce them, but the demand simply isn't there. And that's the problem of the suppliers. Those suppliers, well, putting it differently, looking at the consultants, what did they tell the suppliers a few years ago? They said you have to diversify, so you have to get away from the powertrain, from the combustion engine, you have to do many different things, purchase something here and there, and then you have to invest into electric mobility. And the suppliers that have difficulties today did exactly that. They diversified, they moved away from the traditional powertrain, invested into electric mobility. The position has become more difficult when you want to invest, and they invested into electric mobility, but the unit costs aren't enough. The units are just not enough. So I think you can't tell the companies that they missed something. I would even say that in Germany we have progressed much further when it comes to this transformation than many other countries. The share of electric vehicles in production is 41% this year. And of course you can check all over the world. In China there are huge subsidies, and this looks different there. But anywhere else in the world, the traditional automotive countries, they have smaller shares, so they have a long way to go yet. So that was the long answer to your question. We didn't miss anything at all. The others actually missed. Charging industry, building the charging industry, enabling the infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure, then storing power. We missed handling bureaucracy in such a way that somebody, invests into Europe at all. So the suppliers and the automotive manufacturers did their homework. Great, thanks for that answer. I think this is something that we have to sort of publish and convey to the outside world. Yeah, well, answer, it's not down to me, it's not my fault. Okay, right, so looking at transformation, you did say that it's not easy. Now, looking at the supplier level, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or the EMO customers who are here, are they still able to make it, or is this something what you discuss in your association? Answer, well, yes, of course we discuss this regularly. We have over 400 companies in the German Association of the Automotive Industry, and of course we look at the small and medium-sized businesses. When talking about automotive industry, many people think of the major groups, but in Germany we have so many small and medium-sized companies, and there are many challenges that we have to tackle. One topic is financing transformation, access of small and medium-sized businesses to loans in order to make it possible that they can move within this realm of transformation at all. That's incredibly difficult. We're talking to banks and everybody else, but all this European regulation is blocking things. Banks are regulated, then they say, well, you need to look out for sustainability, green investment, and then a company from the automotive industry that needs to finance itself, banks will tell you straight away, oh dear, there's such a risk buffer that would have to be built up. That's not possible. And I think this is a really important topic, that we sort of move forward here, that we look at the change processes, that we make them possible, that companies have to have access to capital. And this is something that's really important and really difficult. You need to invest now. Whenever we look at surveys in the industry, then we see that companies are not investing in Germany and not as much in Europe. Companies are growing in all sorts of locations, but not in Germany.
I have another question in this context. On the one hand, you have the demand that's not really there due to the factors we talked talked about. And then if you look at the technology itself, as you mentioned in your presentation, we need fewer parts and components in an electric car than compared to an IC engine car. There are two different things we've got to work on there. So no matter what happens, you're going to have a consolidation or shakeout in the supply industry, because you don't have to do as much for an EC electric car as you do for an IC engine car. Yes, the things we're familiar with from the past are changing. The supply chain is changing. New suppliers are joining, and things that you needed in an IC engine car won't be needed. And for us, it's important that we don't want to stop this transformation. Electric car has many advantages. However, we've got to, at long last, understand that we in Germany and Europe have to make it possible for things that are newly created to be newly created here, and that's not the case now. We had a look at a study recently with employment, all different jobs that you have in the automotive industry, 700 different types of job. Well, certain things nowadays are not so much required anymore. The numbers there are going down, but there are other areas, many that are growing. So you can identify these. There are certain sub-areas in electric mobility that will be much more important. For instance, plastics technology. An electric car has to have a lot more done with plastic in the past. But in Germany, we don't see jobs in the plastics industry being created because it's very energy intensive and the companies go elsewhere. And that's the problem. Things that are new, that are created, aren't created here. There are possibilities in Europe, but we're not seeing much in the energy industry yet. So one thing's clear, you don't need certain things in electric cars, and you do need certain other things, and those jobs aren't being created here. Let's have a quick look at politics, if we may. Now, if you look at the public discussion, and don't worry, I won't say miss the boat again, but I have to come up with the next difficult question. In the field of politics, we're talking a lot about the ban on cars with IC engine, and this is something that everyone's talking about nowadays. Is it appropriate for politicians to be doing this? Shouldn't they be focusing on the general conditions, the fundamentals, and stop talking about that discussion? What good is it? Well, focusing on fundamentals, that's definitely good. At the same time, you need to have a realistic look at the actual situation. And I think there are many reasons, very good reasons, that indicate that we've got to move away from the current regulations. The commitment from the German automotive industry is clear. We've invested huge amounts, suppliers, manufacturers. In Germany, we've retooled our factories. We've made the commitment for these factories that are now converted to factories for electric cars. They're not going to be converted back to factories for IC engine cars. That's there. At the same time, we've got to say, if electric mobility is working, it's not just battery electric vehicles. There's plug-in hybrids, there's range extenders, there are other types that are used, fuel cells, hydrogen combustion. There are many ways to achieve climate neutrality. Now, what company opts for which solution? We, politicians or the association, we don't have to do that. There are different use cases, and different technologies can prove to be most efficient there. And this has got to be permitted politically. And that's why we say that this target for 2035 should be changed. There should be prospects for plug-in hybrids and range extenders and things like that. So we've got to recognize that you can't just write things down on paper, because that doesn't make them a reality. Now, of course, we've got to work on the fundamentals too, and if in 2035 everyone wants to drive a BEV, you can do that. You can already do it today. If you just want to buy an electric car today, you could do that. The cars are there. Now, if you look at the prices, well, if you look at that today, you're looking at a comparable car, maybe not in all segments, but in almost all segments, the price differences aren't that big anymore. But the point is, for many reasons, people don't yet all just buy electric cars. But in 2035, if that were to be the case, then anyone can do it. We don't have anything against that. But if it's not the case, then the question is it going to help if the industry has to pay billions in fines, or are there perhaps more intelligent ways to do it? Definitely, yeah. There's a question we just got. It's about the international aspect. It's something we should look at too. Over the long term, if you look at rural areas in Germany and in less developed markets like Africa, what share will there be for electric vehicles? Well, we see that electric vehicles in rural areas are a little bit more popular than in cities because they've got a place to put them. They maybe have photovoltaic panels on the roof, and therefore, in Germany, in rural areas, electric vehicles are more popular than in cities. But if you look at it from a global perspective, it is true that in the future you will have many regions where it's going to take quite a while, and there will be regions maybe where it's not possible at all. I said, Japan, big automotive market, electric car share, 2%. They don't have that there. So the question is, do they want to have it in 5 to 10 years? I don't know. I would assume they won't. So in the future, there will have to be a mix. In Germany, in Europe, there will be a lot of use cases in which pure BEVs will be the be-all and end-all, but there will be other markets where that's not the case. And so therefore, there's got to be a strategy here so that companies can offer as many different types of propulsion systems as possible. Different companies will offer different things. It doesn't have to be one company that offers everything. Okay, let's look at the international influence. You talked about China, the price differences that aren't so big, and now you have more and more new models coming from China. So I think also that the perception of consumers in terms of the pricing for such vehicles is changing. Now, how well are German automotive suppliers prepared for this? The suppliers? The OEMs, manufacturers. For instance, Mercedes, there was a discussion about a premium for a long time and so on. How well prepared are they? You'll be surprised to hear me say we're very well prepared. And this is the case because we, the German automotive industry, have shares everywhere in the world. We've got shares in China, Brazil, and so on. And one thing's clear for us. This can't be a one-way street. It's not acceptable for Germans to have 18% market share in Germany. In 2000, we had 50% market share. We can't say that that's the automatic definition. We have market shares there, and the Chinese have 0% market share here. That can't be the definition. That's not how it works. In France, French companies are market leaders. In Germany, it's German companies, and in China now it's Chinese manufacturers, and I think it's a normal development to see that. Companies, Chinese companies, are now moving into the world market, but at the same time, very clearly, there are a lot of subsidies being paid in China, and the question then is, do we really have a level playing field? Are the conditions for competition the same? And I'd say that in many areas of the value chain, we're not all acting at the same level. So I think there are areas where it's difficult. If you look at the finished car, it's a little bit different. Just because you bring cars to Europe, that doesn't mean necessarily anyone will buy them. It could be different with steel, but for vehicles, you've got to see how the residual value develops. You have a service network. What's the brand? Does it have everything that I want? Do I trust the safety of the car? And so on. So the brands have to create a certain brand image first. I'm not saying that it can't work, but it's a big job. And then you talked about the premium strategy. Well, I could say, what is the strategy of Chinese manufacturers? Right now, it's still changing very often. They have new attempts. They set up a new headquarters in Europe. They hire a lot of people, and 1 year later, the whole thing is shut back down. So we see that there are different players who are trying to gain market share in Europe, but that's not going to happen by itself. So There's more competition. We accept this competition. We don't mind it because in the automotive industry, if you're active everywhere, you've got to be able to accept that. Then for suppliers, I think the situation might be a little bit more difficult. But I don't think we should start panicking and saying everything in Europe is going downhill because now there's Chinese companies coming here. I'd say, okay, let's wait and see how that works. It's not easy. And there will be a certain number of challenges they'll have to meet. We shouldn't forget that. And as I just said, in Germany, well, the Chinese OEMs in the last 4 or 5 years have multiplied their market share by about 10 times, tenfold. And in Germany, we have the same market share. So we can accept additional competitors here, but we've still got to continue to work just as hard in the future as we have in the past. That was a great final word, because if you look over there, I've been given a hint that I have to stop. I want to give you a little bit of feedback. I'm very happy about what we talked about, and I'm annoyed that we don't have more time for 2 reasons. You've given a great overview. I think the country comparison was sensational, and doing that was great. But what I liked even more was the realistic and, in fact, quite positive look at the overall subject. And I had the feeling that I was really learning something here. And I think that that's why this was a very special presentation. Thanks for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for Dr. Kalweit from the German Automotive Industry Association. Thank you very much. All the best.